So let's jump right into it. Thank you, everybody, for attending episode 33 in Let's Talk Recruiting, where peer practitioners in recruiting and TA industry all get together and talk about various topics. Today we have basically across the country represented once again. It's always nice to see when we can connect the four corners of the country. I find that interesting. Today's topic is going to be signs your recruiting team needs help. Typically, the number one reason for needing help is typically rec load, but then again, there's also all kinds of reasons that can kind of raise the radar and start to hear noise back from the hiring managers. So today we have with us Ed Saison out of the San Francisco Bay Area, Andy Marchetti. Andy, did I get that right?
It's Marchetti.
Marchetti. Sorry.
No problem.
And I was on a good roll of hitting people's last names correctly. I just broke it. We have Rachel Couples out of Seattle. And David, I'm going to give him my best shot. David Yaramilo. Did I get it?
Close. J's like an H. Jaramillo.
Jaramillo. Oh, man. Okay. Live and learn. I am sorry.
It's okay.
I have a name that people have been misspeaking my whole life. So I'm always surprised when people get my last name right. All right. Again, signs your recruiting team needs help. We're going to do a round robin. Each panelist has brought together a key point to bring to the discussion. And from there, we'll go into the conversation. If you're in the audience, feel free to add any comments or questions in the chat area, and we'll do our best to hit those. So with that said, Ed, I'm going to go right over to you. If you want to go with your topic that you had.
All right. I'm Ed Saison, and I manage all the recruiting for ARC Document Solutions. We're a 30-year publicly traded company that's been around servicing the needs of the AEC industry, architecture, engineering, construction industry. And so that generally means looking for people in a very specialized segment of printing. We are the largest commercial digital printer in the country. Prior to this, I owned a medical staffing agency for 6 years. And before that, I ran all of the IT recruiting for Kaiser Permanente. I was also in charge of starting up several staffing operations for some startups like UMA, which is still around. And I also was director of talent acquisition for another very successful startup in 2000 called Commerce One. That said, I enjoy what I do because I empower the people who work for me in the teams that I develop to make them better recruiters. So I've always been very aware of when my team needs help.
How are you being made aware of that, Ed? What are some like signs that pop up on your radar that somebody's in need?
Well, in many of the cases I've been working with, it's usually involving high volume recruiting. So there are metrics, about 4 or 5 metrics that I tend to focus on that tells me whether my team needs help. The very first one is the number of qualified candidates per hire, and I typically have weekly reports, and they run through the toughest searches that they're doing, and I ask for number of qualified candidates per hire. If it's a really difficult position, then they should have at least 3 candidates per hire. Usually 10 is what I look for. And if they are not able to produce that, then I know that they need help. Another metric that I look at is the, what is this here? I'm sorry, the sources that they're using. That tells me whether or not they are creative. And if they don't have at least 5 sources where they're pulling people from, including the tools that I give them, which also include an AI component, then I know they don't know the technology and they could use help, more training, or just the other metric that I look at is the time to fill. Obviously, that's pretty obvious, but there's no hard and fast rule because it depends on the type of position that they're looking at, that they're working on. Another is the interview to hire ratio that I look at. and that tells me whether or not they understand the role. And then the last one that I look at is the quality of hiring manager assessment, or the reviews that they're getting. At the end of every placement, we send out a questionnaire to hiring managers and ask them for their input about the experience. And if and it's a scale of 1 to 5. And if the recruiter is not hitting at least a 3 or 4, then I know that they're in trouble. So those are the kinds of metrics that I look at right off the bat.
And are you sending that?
There are a bunch of other.
Sorry, real quick.
There are a bunch of other metrics that I look at, but those are generally the top 4 or 5.
Got it. In regards to the manager review or survey, are you sending that every rec, or let's say I'm a manager that had 4 recs in the quarter, am I getting 4 surveys, or is it? The reason why I ask is we did this and we would do once per quarter because we get that complaint. I get too many emails. What's your format for sending out those manager surveys?
I do it after about, again, to your point, if a manager has 3 or 4 recs that the same recruiter is working on, then I wouldn't send one every rec. We try to do it within, say, 60 to 90 days of the experience with the recruiter. Now, generally, if a recruiter has been servicing a hiring manager well, then we might draw it out to 90 days, maybe 4 months. But we generally like to get the manager's input, because it doesn't matter how long you've been working with the recruiter sometimes can get sloppy, or the recruiter can start to not pay attention to that manager because things have been working so well. So it's a way for both parties to know that that white glove customer experience, whether it's the candidate or the hiring manager, needs to continue.
What happens if a manager doesn't fill out the survey? Is there a next step, or is it kind of you just let it be a wash?
I check in with hiring managers from time to time, and if we don't get a response, we don't sweat it. Generally, if there is no response, that means that the manager isn't complaining.
So it's kind of a no news is good news type situation?
Yeah, generally, for the most part. Now, it can also mean that the manager is just afraid to say something, but in our company, and in many of the other companies I've been with, including things as companies that were very academic, they tend to tread lightly on dissing anybody. I worked for the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and ran their recruiting, and it was hard to get the physicists, the physicists who were hiring, to even take the time to respond to anything HR. But I'd make the rounds, I'd go visit with them, and stopping by unannounced for a 5-minute chat is always a good idea, and it works. They'll tell me what's on their mind, and they'll tell me whether they're happy.
When you say you look at,
the point is getting management feedback, getting hiring manager feedback. That's what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. It's like if you're running a business, it's customer satisfaction survey. Everybody should be doing that. One last question for you around the metrics. I saw you looking off at the screen. When you say look at your metrics, what do you literally review? Is it a dashboard? Is it a BI type tool? Is it a spreadsheet? And how often do you look at numbers like that?
Quarterly, I send a report up to my management, the VP of HR, so that they know what's happening. Now, granted, we're in a slowdown because of the impact of COVID, so we don't need to be sending those out. But during the peak of our activity, once every so many weeks, say 2 weeks to monthly, I send out a report so people know what's happening.
Got it. Yeah, I'm with you on sending information up quarterly, but at that team level, I always love to see, and this is what I've done at different places, is it's weekly, where each Monday morning that scorecard goes out. So it's like this constant, everybody knows it's coming out. It's this constant short story. And one last question for you around the sourcing metric. It's really interesting that you're looking at having around 5 different sources. Do you allow LinkedIn to be one of your 5?
Always.
Okay. All right. I was going to have some upset recruiters if you said no. All right. I've never heard of that, having looked to have multiple sources within there. So that's a really interesting metric. When it came to sources, it was typically source of a hire. So to look at those multiple sources per rec type submittal, that's real interesting. The rest of the panelists, anything to add to what Ed was talking about around metrics and numbers?
I mean, I can echo. This is David, and I can certainly echo the sentiment around the QC scores. We had implemented that at a former shop I was at years ago. They'd never done it before at a company called Santander Consumer. They're part of Banco Santander out of Spain. Their U.S. division is here for consumer finance and auto finance, and we implemented the QC scores for both hiring managers as well as for candidates, anybody that was in that interview stage or beyond, to make sure that we were doing it well. And that definitely gave us some good insight as to whether our recruiter was doing a good job. To your point earlier, Ed, about, if the scores were fairly low. Ours were, I think, ranked from 0 to 100. So we were always looking for 90s and above in terms of our quality and our satisfaction scores. And it was always about 8 or 9 questions, nothing difficult. I think it was a Survey Monkey. And we were able to do a lot of reporting off of it. And it was very good. It gave us a lot of insight as to whether the team was doing well or that individual recruiter needed some support. So yeah, I'd echo that for sure.
And by QC, you mean
That
quality
might be a
control?
topic.
Sorry.
That might be a topic, Sean, for another one of your panels.
Yeah, we just had a short one around metrics. It got a lot of interest on it. I showed one of the scorecards that I use. So yeah, there's a lot of interest around that. I think it's probably an ongoing series of content around getting to know metrics and how do you get them and whatnot. Just getting the numbers and then being able to organize them and present them is an achievement, I think, with most systems. Andy or Rachel, anything to add?
Oh, sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
You're on mute, Rachel. Oh. Rachel, you got your video. Oh, there you go. No, we can't hear you. We'll go with that. Andy, jump in there. I'll try.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I definitely agree on the hiring manager surveys. They're incredibly insightful to just give us kind of a benchmark. And another, just talking Ed's comment on some of the metrics they look at, I totally agree as far as where you can drill into quality, around the interviews per submittal, hires per interview, and not just on the recruiter performance, but also on the hiring manager side to see if something's off. If we have 9 interviews and 0 offers, it's like, why are you interviewing these people? So yeah, I think it's really important, especially today where we have so much data available to us, to really pay attention to it, because they can be huge indicators of problems we can get in front of.
Excellent. Andy, as we get Rachel sort of situated here, can we just sort of jump into your item? Just
Sure.
roll over into you.
Absolutely. So I'm Andy Marchetti. I lead technology recruiting for XPO Logistics. Prior to that, I was with General Dynamics Information Technology. I managed the Global Solutions Division, which I don't think exists anymore. There's been a reorg since I left recruiting. General Dynamics was more of a high volume, fast paced recruiting model, whereas XPO is more high end, high quality, lower volume. So it's been an interesting adjustment. And, very, very generally, the biggest indicators I've seen that there are issues has always been noise in general, escalations, right? I don't want to be overly cynical. I think a lot of organizations do value recruiting highly, but typically it's the best we can hope for is that no one's talking about recruiting. That means everything's going great. Typically the more noise you hear, the more issues you're having. And, when as a leader, you're continually getting emails and IMs and phone calls with concern, things of that nature, that is typically my tip off that, okay, well, something's not going well here. And a lot of times in my experience, because to Ed's point, metrics are so prevalent, you can have metrics that are perfectly in line. Things look great on paper. And yet you have hiring managers out there who are complaining and not happy and escalating to their supervisor. And, you're hearing about it as a leader. So what it's really stressed to me, that metrics are extremely important and we need to pay attention to them, but perception is critical. How does the business perceive the service you're providing, the individual recruiters they're interacting with? Do they feel like they're a priority? Is there good communication? Those sorts of things. And there are times where, as a leader, you'll dig into it and the recruiter has submitted several qualified candidates. There have been interviews, but communication hasn't been great. Follow-up hasn't been great. And the manager's just not happy. And so, it gives you as a leader an opportunity to, kind of coach that recruiter. Or in some cases, you'll find that personalities don't match. You may have a great recruiter who everyone else loves and one or two managers they just don't sync with. And that can be a tough situation because most recruiters, good recruiters, have a lot of pride, take their jobs personally, and they don't like getting pulled off of, a manager or relationship that they're struggling to develop. They typically have that competitive fire where I know I can win this person over. But the right move is to align that manager with, maybe someone they're a little bit more in sync with from just a disposition and personality perspective. So that's always been key to me is, when you start hearing that noise, that you really need to dig in, and it's very rarely what you expect it to be once you do dig in.
And let me add to that around the noise level. It's almost like I always used to call this when I would go in. I'm in recruiting operations, so I would go in on projects with companies, and I would always have this person that I called the success factor of my project. And that success factor is the person who all the recruiters immediately reported to. Kind of my determining factor on how successful this effort is going to be is the amount of time they spent dealing with issues upward versus the time they spent dealing downward, kind of leading their team and supporting their team. And if it was all about dealing with people upward, I'm like, okay, my work's cut out for me on this one. What do you think is a fair and realistic, if you're going to divvy up a staffing leader's time dealing up versus dealing down? Is it a 50-50? What's a sign of a good program? Being realistic that, hey, managers need to be catered for. What do you think is like a good number of, hey, I run a successful program because I'm just throwing this out there, 20% of my time dealing upwards. Is that realistic?
I mean, I would say probably best in class would be 80-20. 70-30 is typically what I would strive for. I think there's always going to be a need to manage upward, as far as setting expectations or just clearly articulating vision and strategy. But, I'm a firm believer that the more time you spend leading, managing, coaching, mentoring your team, the less noise there should be. So, if you can really dedicate to that, in my opinion, you will drastically reduce those upward escalations. So 70-30 would be kind of the realistic goal I would set.
And to clarify, 70 is where? Upward or downward?
70 is down.
Okay,
70
good. That's what I thought.
30 is up, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
How about the rest of the panels? What are your thoughts around time spent as an indicator? Ed, Rachel, anything on that one?
This is Ed. Yeah, this is Ed. It all depends on how you get to know your hiring managers. And I encourage all of my recruiters to get out there and get in the face of their managers so that they understand who the recruiter is. The hiring manager understands who the recruiter is, and the recruiter understands what the manager's work style is. The recruiters who tend to get in trouble are the ones who isolate themselves and think that they're doing a good job because they're just pushing paper and they're getting on the phone. But if they don't get in front of the hiring manager to develop a relationship, it's going to be problematic.
Just to add to that, hopefully you guys can hear me now.
Gotcha.
I would say that also as leaders, not every rec is it's not apples to apples, right? So not every rec is created equal. So making sure that as leaders and just as recruiters that we're explaining and educating senior leadership, hiring, managers, really what time to fill, how long is it really going to take? Job A may have taken 4 weeks. Job B, realistically, with the data that we have, we know it may take 9 weeks.
Yeah, I'd want to echo Ed's sentiment as well on communicating with your hiring manager as well. Recruiters sometimes will tend to hide behind an IM or an email or phone call and then, play that game. I used to say, especially if you work in a corporate office and your hiring managers are also in the corporate office, they're going to come down and bother you. So, something's going wrong. So you might as well go up there and make sure that you've got that FaceTime or have a regular cadence once a month. I know I used to do that with especially department heads. I'd have my recruiter with me. We'd meet with them and make sure where we at with all the requisitions, the status of them. Are there any issues or problems, and kind of get ahead of them before I get the private email or the private meeting that says, David, I need to talk to you about your recruiter and what's going on with them right now. So I would always encourage my team to have that FaceTime and make sure that you get in front of the snowball before it gets too big.
Kind of on that line about staying ahead of the snowball. One of the key metrics I'd love to look at was in regards to open recs, how long has it been open, and then the number of total on-site interviews. If you have a good high number and the rec isn't filling and it's long overdue, typically an issue on the hiring team. If it's long overdue and they're not bringing any on-site interviews, they being the recruiter, that's probably the issue there. So it's almost like if a rec is 4 weeks old and there's only been 1 or 2 on-site interviews, to me that was kind of like an indicator in the metrics where it gets you a little red light.
Right.
Does anybody how do you look towards that number of on-site interviews when it comes to open recs as kind of an indicator of something's not in sync here?
I mean, I would compare that to maybe prior requisitions to sort of see, if you have those metrics available, right, to see if it's on par. So I'll look at, let's say, like an internal auditor is a typical example, one where you're probably not going to close that within 30 days. Those are usually pretty tough, especially since they're always in demand. There's never a pipeline, a heavy, thick pipeline for them. So if you can find 2 or 3 candidates, especially here in the Dallas market, you have to jump on them fairly quickly. So I'd look at prior recs to see, okay, where were we 6 months ago with another rec? Did it take 6 weeks before we had the first interview? Or did it just take 3 weeks? Or was there something else going on at that time? Was it summertime when folks tend to slow down after tax season? They get their bonuses, so those audit candidates tend to be more open to switching. Or was it during the busy season where we probably can't find somebody fairly quickly want to switch out? So I always like to compare it with prior recs of similar backgrounds.
I'd agree with David. I think it depends on kind of the corporate and that team culture around it and past history. And the other thing is when I see something like that I think maybe out of whack, I'll interact directly with the hiring team and ask how they're feeling. And, we have a group, one of our technology groups in Boston are extremely particular, and we'll have 6 on-site interviews and no offer, but they'll tell me it's going great. Really good candidates. We're getting close, and they're really happy with it. And I have a recruiter who thinks they're failing. So I think there's also value in interacting directly with that hiring team to take their pulse and see how they feel. Are they frustrated, or do they feel like this is just kind of the natural flow and this is how we do it?
Excellent.
To your point, getting to know the teams is critical. A lot of times I will have my recruiters sit in business planning meetings There's usually a cadence. It's a weekly meeting, and everybody's setting priorities, talking about problems. I have the recruiters, and I talk to the hiring manager leading that meeting to expect my person to sit in there so they can cover that as part of the business process, problems that need to be attended. But I'll tell my recruiter, don't just leave after you do your presentation because they're talking about the finances or they're talking about a technical issue does not mean that you do not need to be educated about those issues. So as the teams become familiar with my recruiter as part of the team, not just the recruiting part, but also a business solution, because there may be instances where the recruiter can ask the right questions or can come up with some insights that contributes to that meeting, and thereby becoming a consultant to the hiring manager in the cases of interviews. So they can then push the process along by being recognized as part of the team, as opposed to an external person just feeding them candidates.
Excellent. I'd love to see when recruiters are in their BU team meetings, regardless of whether they're talking recs, they're just in there, right? That presence. Rachel,
Right.
let's jump over to your item.
Hello, my name is Rachel Couples. I have, for the last 20 years, either been in business development, staffing, or corporate recruiting. I'm a job seeker. So everyone on the panel is working. I am currently a recruiter that is seeking employment for herself. I am here to talk just a little bit about missing the mark on diversity inclusion when it comes to recruiting. All of these topics are huge topics, and there's no way that we could really dive into them as much as they deserve. But some of the areas that I think where it starts with, and this is in general, everybody has touched on this, it's alignment and accountability with your recruiting team, but also with senior leadership and your hiring managers, that diversity and inclusion is actually something that we're going to embrace and look for. And from there, it starts with writing our job advertisement. So there's a ton of metrics and things that we can pull from our applicant tracking systems, but I like to just pull up LinkedIn, pull up whatever tool or whatever source the recruiters are posting our job advertisements on, and look what's being written, what are we saying, who are we including, who are we excluding with our language. I met a phenomenal woman, her name's Katrina Kibben from 3 Years Media, and she actually does trainings on writing inclusive job advertisements. So if anybody's interested in contacting her, she's phenomenal. But like I said, it starts with the alignment from leadership, goes then with what are we advertising, and then where are we posting our jobs, talking about sources. We're talking about whether LinkedIn is the source or not, or there's a ton of community groups and community job boards and things that are actually free to organizations where you can post your job advertisements and reach large communities of people that may or may not be using ZipRecruiter, Indeed, or, we can name a ton of them. Those are just off the top of my head. And where you're reaching all the communities in your area, whether you're in Texas or Washington or wherever you're at. And I think, Ed had said something about feedback from, getting feedback from your managers. I had an instance once where we were hitting the mark. Like, the hiring manager was absolutely thrilled. No noise, just thrilled. And then we had an executive walk through a department and said, why does everybody look the same? They were getting people, the orders were getting filled, they were posting the jobs in the same place. That it was between recruiting and the hiring manager. The recruiter had figured out what's the secret sauce, who is the hiring manager going to say yes to. So where we were as a team, and I say we because it was my team, missed the mark, was we were you were posting the same job ad over and over again in the same place, getting the same result. So now we have this customer service floor full of people where there's absolutely no diversity. And an organization's strength really lies in diversity, right? Like diversity of experience, thought. And I believe that a key outside of metrics is finding all of the individual groups. Once you've nailed down your narrative as far as your job ads, where are you going to post the jobs and get in front of all the candidates? Because you can hire and fill and beat statistically over and over again your time to fill, but you still might be hiring the wrong candidates.
Yeah, Rachel, to add to that, believing that no, you can. So recruiters kind of not control, but manage the funnel, right? Sort of going along the lines of metrics and reporting and knowing your numbers. What I've done before to try and address is there that bias in hiring issue is we would have metric reports that showed the diverse, and this only goes for people that I self-identify, right? If the top of your funnel, right, those that applied is 30% diverse, in theory, once you go down the funnel and get down to offers made, it should reflect 30% or more diversity, right? That means you're building out your diversity. Then we would do that, to your point, by department, by manager, and then where typically we would see issues would be around career levels. So we could identify, is there biased hiring in these areas? The companies that I worked at least, this was mainly, California type companies. So we're pretty good at being diverse. Okay, it's a non-issue. We can show by the numbers we're good. But once you get into the director and above levels, you may have an issue here. So knowing your numbers allows you to drill down into like a true problem. And it's much easier to fix a lesser skilled issue than it is a higher skilled issue. I will say that there's a lot more politics involved.
Well, and I believe it all stems from, as an individual recruiter, what is your pipeline? What are you building? What is, your bench? Who are you networking with? If you were to peek into the networks and groups that I'm part of, you may think, wow, she's really confused. No, she's part of all these different groups that, does she really belong in these groups? And I do. I introduce myself and I say, hi, my name is Rachel and I'm a recruiter and I'm looking to hire people. Can I post jobs in your group? Can you share, my jobs? So I think I agree with you 100%. It is harder the higher you, move up in the chain. However, it's not impossible. If the recruiting team really makes a point of making it a priority.
Yeah. Rest of the panelists, anything to add to that?
I had an interesting, Rachel, you kind of reminded me as far as the diversity piece, but specifically more around our hiring managers were very particular about having a list of companies that they wanted us to target from. They said, these are the people that we want, right? And I'm talking for the last companies I worked at where it was contact centers, so large call center. And again, this Dallas-Fort Worth area, very competitive, lots of big contact centers. Financial services is huge out here. So they had, this list of 10 companies and we want them to be from these shops. And we kept arguing with them that, we need a little bit more diversity. We think we can probably find you as good or maybe better candidates. And so what we did was we actually started measuring not just the turnover rates, how long these people were actually in the company, but we also started measuring how successful they were, meaning were they the ones bonusing longer? Were they getting those high satisfaction scores from the customers calling in? Were there any errors or issues as far as the dial-ins were concerned? And it turns out that we had a lot of success with people from retail, people right out of school, college students, mothers that were trying to get back into the workforce type of thing, and maybe had large gaps in employment. So all of a sudden the aha moment, went off in their heads. We're like, hey, we don't need to pay a lot of money to try to bring the competition in. we've got this whole other base of potential targets to go after, and it increases our diversity as a result. So it took I'd say about a year and a half to kind of really proof it out and show them the numbers. But it became sort of the de facto, and the hiring managers, they would look at a resume and go, oh yeah, we know what David's doing here. He's giving us one of these people, and ultimately they would work out. So it worked out for us pretty well.
And it is a large undertaking, right? This isn't something that happens overnight.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, ours was a year and a half, and it was a lot of arm wrangling for sure. They were very adamant that we could not find people from outside that were going to be successful, and we had to put ourselves on the line pretty hard. But thankfully, it worked out.
I recently, in the last few years, had a pretty high-level hiring manager that turned out they were very biased on the type of, like you mentioned, college, where someone received their education. And I like to think it has to do with the amount of time that I spent building a relationship with this hiring manager. I know we've all talked about relationships. I was able to sit down the hiring manager and say, come on, what are you saying? And just have a real, frank, honest conversation with, how my perception of what their bias was. And we did a similar thing, kind of scraped it together with the last few hires and a role like that. And I was able to show the hiring manager the same thing. Like, look, there's no rhyme or reason of where they went to school. It's about these other metrics.
Andy,
sometimes you get better pricing too, right? Sometimes you can get them in a little bit cheaper.
Ed, Andy,
Well,
anything to add to that?
especially if they're younger in their career, like just looking for, the opportunity to get the experience. But I don't think what I'm not saying is if you hire a diverse candidate, you pay less. That's not the case. But if you're willing to take a chance on a greener candidate, then absolutely.
Excellent.
John, I'm actually working with one of our groups right now. The similar issue that Rachel's describing is the phrase I like to use is they hire in their own image. They like someone who has a very similar background, a very similar career progression, and kind of what we've been trying to stress to him is, look, you want your teams wide, not just deep. Right? I mean, you're always talking that you don't have time to train. You don't have time to train. Well, if you bring people on with varied experience and backgrounds and perspectives, what you'll find is they help get each other up to speed, because where one person is light, you have another person who's strong. If you build your teams that way, not only are they going to handle problems and challenges better, but you're going to build stronger teams. And we're getting there with him. But another thing that we've seen that has really helped in opening up diversity is, and it typically, in my experience, it's not that you're running into a bigoted hiring manager, right? It's more they like people who think like them, who approach problems like they do. So what we've started doing is reflecting the diversity that we are seeking in the interview panel. So, for example, in technology, a big one is women in management, right? There aren't a lot of them. So what we've started doing is pulling women into the interview process so that perspective is at the table during the decision-making process. And that has started to actually really, really help us start to move that needle.
No, that's great.
That's a great idea. I think, and to add another layer to that is, making sure it's not only women, but that group of women is also representing, and I'm sure you're doing this as well.
Yeah, that was just an example, but yeah. Absolutely. No, it's across the board. Whatever diversity we seek, we attempt to mirror on the interview panel so that that perspective is represented and not missed, basically.
Excellent.
Sorry, I know we could probably all talk forever, but another area, and John, I'm sorry, I'm going to go off road really quick, but another area where we miss the mark, I think, is, as recruiters, is internal candidates, right? Like, if we're going to hire a green candidate for a role, isn't there somebody within the organization maybe it is one of those women that you pulled into a panel interview and asked for their opinion. So it's another area to look for ways to grow and improve.
I will add, Ed, you sort of brought this up before, deeper topics. We are starting a sort of a series on diversity and inclusion recruiting, because it is a deep conversation to have consistently and consecutively. With that said, I got to jump over to David. David, let's go on to your item. Thank you,
Sure.
Rachel.
Yeah, so David Jaramillo, kind of like everybody else, long time in terms of recruiting experience. I've been in this well over 15 years. My background actually is in computer systems and then in finance. So I actually got into this by accident, walking into a Robert Half office one day, laid off as an analyst. And after 7 interviews and 6 hours of technical tests and whatnot, they ultimately said, hey, we think you'd be great as a recruiter. And agency work, as well as corporate and MSP type work, I am now on the corporate side. So long time coming into kind of this space over here. I've taken teams from good to great. I've started teams from scratch. I've had remote teams all over the country, including Hawaii. That's always fun, having that time zone, and everything in between, and then local teams as well. So I know our original topic was around, how do you know when there's an issue, when there's something going wrong with your team, with your recruiting team. And it's a horrible term, but I echo a friend of mine who used to say the term cancer. He says, do you have a cancer, David, on your team? And I like to consider it like, well, cancer, you can either treat it, right, with chemo or radiation or whatnot, or you can excise it and cut it out. Well, I would think the same thing. You want to engage your recruiter if there's an issue with one, try to get them involved. But ultimately, if you can't do it, then, you're going to have to just tell them, hey, listen, it's up or out. We got to figure out a way to kind of get you into the right role. If this isn't the right role for you, or maybe this isn't the right company for you. And I've had experiences where I've had to do both. You take someone that was, let's say, influencing others in a negative way, really just not the bad seed, not paying attention in meetings, not engaged, wasn't getting the feedback timely to the hiring managers. And of course, you keep hearing it over and over and over again. And ultimately, you're trying to encourage them. You're trying to be their coach. You're trying to ask them, what can we do? Let's shift your rec load. Let's shift your hiring managers. Let's try a different type of a search. And then, the difficult part is, having to say, listen, this may not be the best place for you. You're a great recruiter. I think you're good, but this just might not be the right spot. I hate when it comes to that. Usually it hardly ever comes to that, but it has in my experience. The better options are always the treatment, right? Sort of treating the cancer, treating the issue. And usually they will either figure that out on their own, like, okay, you know what, this isn't the right spot for me, so I'm just going to leave. Or they kind of grow up and they say, you know what, we actually, David, I hear you, and I think I can actually figure this out, and I do want to be successful in this team and in this role. And then the other people on the team actually start to influence them to say, hey, listen, you're the issue. We don't want to listen to you anymore. You're the issue. You're the problem. You need to get with the program and get with us, type of thing, in terms of where we're going. So thankfully, I've been fortunate enough to have more of those situations than having to let teams go. But it is common, especially, and I think it's probably harder now with remote situations, where a lot of teams are remote. So you don't have that true FaceTime or meeting time. I guess you can obviously Zoom, but it's a little bit harder when everybody's technically remote all the time. And so I think as a leader in the recruiting space, you've got to be very diligent and very much on top. I'm not sure if it was Andy or Ed, but having those weekly cadence meetings. When I had all my teams remote, we'd have a daily kind of a pull-up call, right, at 8:30 in the morning Central Time for 5 or 10 minutes. It's just, okay, let's just talk through any issues and problems, and then that way we didn't get anything too out of hand. Sorry, long explanation.
Yeah. David, let me ask you this around deciding to treat or to cut out, for lack of better world, kind of the real world situation of many companies is when it comes to the recruiter and the team makeup, it's kind of a combination of FTE or contractor, or maybe you're straight FTEs. When you're deciding when to coach and when to just remove, does contractor or FTE, I mean, obviously with FTEs, you got to put in an effort, but if I'm there on contract, should I have my shit together from day one? Is the patience a little bit less when they're on contract?
Right. No, that's a good question. I've been lucky. The contractors that I've identified for work have been experienced. I mean, the idea was, hey, we need a specialist to come in and, take care of this, right? We need this triage immediately. So I've been lucky where I have not had to do that with a contractor. And I usually give folks about 30 days. That I always tell my team, you've got 30 days to ask as many bad questions as possible. Don't worry about the answer. You don't know anything yet. You're brand new, right? So the unconscious ignorance. So ask all the questions, make as many mistakes as possible early on. I think I'd probably give less sort of flexibility to a contractor a bit, only because my expectation is, hey, you're being hired for a particular reason and probably being paid a premium as a result of it. So long answer to your question, but probably contractors, I'd maybe give them a little bit less leeway on something like that.
Yeah, I'm with that. I do think the expectation comes to be, especially if you're contracting by choice versus by circumstance, if you are truly contracting by choice, your bar is up high. So I would say from day one.
Correct. And right now, I mean, there's still a lot of those hired guns, right, that are out there. But then there's folks, Rachel, you mentioned you're kind of on the market. I know a lot of folks here in Dallas, a lot of great recruiters, they're having to do it, they're having to move into that space. So I wouldn't expect them to, come in and just come guns blazing because they're not used to being in that contractor world.
Gotcha. Interesting. Anybody else to add to it? I know we've gone quite a bit over our mark, but it was a really good conversation. But anything to add? Final comments? Thanks, Deb.
I was just going to add, it really, when I look at hiring recruiters for my teams, I think we've all heard the term, are you going to build or buy a recruiter, right? And it goes with the contract. I agree 100%. You're definitely buying when you're looking for, a contractor. But I've found great success in building recruiters. Actually, I've found more success in putting the time in with the individuals that are willing and eager to learn.
Andy, Ed, anything? Any final comments?
No, I think we've exhausted a lot of good ideas here. I mean, these are certainly topics worth talking about for a long time.
Excellent.
Yeah, there was a comment there on the chat. What do we look for as hiring managers? What do we look for in second interviews when we're looking at hiring a recruiter? Personally, I look to see whether they can gel with the team. What's their personality like? I will usually bring them in with the rest of the team and how do they actually interact and will they work well together? There will be a bullpen-ish situation a lot of times. So, is this someone that's going to be a jerk? I think, Ed, you mentioned it in the comment. Is this someone that's going to be a jerk? Are they going to be able to be flexible? I like to say, is this someone I want to have a beer with after hours type of thing? And so for me, that's my sort of second interview with someone, is to figure out, is this someone I really want to spend some time with? Not just technically, are they capable type of thing.
Absolutely. Eddie, any final comments?
Yeah, I'd just agree. The second interview, I totally agree with David. It's more about fit and feel, kind of how you gel with the team, your personality, your approach. Dig a little bit into accountability. Just make sure that's something that they're accustomed to is reporting and, weekly calls or those sorts of things. But yeah, if you get to the second interview, my expectation would be that, you meet the qualifications for the position. It's really understanding fit at that point.
Excellent. And on that note, I think I'm going to call it a day on that one. So thank you all panelists. I thought that was another fantastic conversation. Again, apologize for going over, but it kept going. I think it was great. So with that said, enjoy the rest of the day. Enjoy your week. I'll see everybody soon. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.